This dog wasn't just a stray. He led the police to a crime they never expected. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain-soaked pavement and fresh brewed coffee from the nearby cafe. Detective Eleanor Ellie Carter barely noticed as she exited the precinct, her mind clouded by exhaustion and the lingering ache of memories she wished she could erase. The city moved around her as it always did. Cars honking, pedestrians rushing, a barista calling out orders in a cheery voice. But Ellie felt disconnected from it all, as if she were trapped in an invisible bubble, watching the world move on while she remained stuck. 6 months. 6 months since the botched raid. Since her partner, Jack Monroe, had bled out on the cold warehouse floor while she could do nothing but scream for help. 6 months since she had begun questioning everything, the job, the justice system, and most of all, herself. Ellie sighed, shaking off the thoughts as she adjusted her jacket. She was just stepping toward the cafe when something caught her attention. A dog standing motionless near the precinct entrance. At first glance, he looked like any other stray, a large black Labrador mix, his fur matted with dirt, his ribs faintly visible beneath his coat. But there was something different about this dog. He wasn't sniffing around for food or wagging his tail in search of kindness. He was watching. Ellie slowed her steps, meeting his intense golden brown eyes. They were sharp, filled with something that sent a strange shiver down her spine. Not fear, but recognition. The dog stepped forward, tail stiff, posture tense but not aggressive. He made a low whimpering sound, then let out a sharp bark. 1, 2, 3, precise, urgent. Ellie frowned. "Hey there, boy, what's up?" The dog took another step toward her, then nudged his nose against her leg. Ellie crouched cautiously, extending a hand. The dog hesitated, his body vibrating with restless energy. Instead of sniffing her fingers, he did something strange. He grabbed the cuff of her jacket with his teeth and pulled. Ellie froze. The action was deliberate, not frantic like a starving stray seeking food, but insistent, almost desperate. She glanced toward the precinct doors where a few officers stood chatting, oblivious to the exchange happening just a few feet away. "Hey, Carter!" Officer Mike Henderson, a middle-aged detective with a fondness for beer and skepticism, called out. "You making friends with the local wildlife?" Ellie smirked, standing up. "Something like that?" Mike chuckled, but his gaze darkened slightly. "That dog's been hanging around since early morning. He won't leave, just sits there barking his damn head off." Ellie looked back down at the dog, who was still staring up at her, unwavering, as if he understood every word. "You're serious?" she asked. Mike nodded, shoving his hands into his coat pockets. "Yeah, we called animal control, but they're busy with some case on the east side. Figured he'd wander off eventually, but..." Ellie turned back to the dog. He was still holding the edge of her sleeve, his jaws gentle but firm. Something in her gut twisted. Ellie had spent years honing her instincts, and they rarely failed her. Something was off. "All right, boy," she murmured. "You want me to follow you?" At her words, the dog released her sleeve and backed up, turning sharply before looking over his shoulder. His eyes locked onto hers once again, an unspoken command. Ellie exhaled, rubbing the back of her neck. She knew she shouldn't. She had a meeting with Captain Myers in 20 minutes, paperwork to finish, and a backlog of unsolved cases waiting on her desk. And yet, she followed. The dog moved with purpose. Not the hesitant, cautious pace of a lost stray, but a determined stride, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Ellie trailed a few steps behind, boots clicking against the wet pavement. The city hummed around them, horns blaring, engines roaring, footsteps echoing. But in that moment, it all faded away. Left turn, right turn, past the flower shop, across the pedestrian bridge. With each step, Ellie's tension grew. Where the hell was he taking her? "All right, Shadow," she muttered, giving the dog a name as she jogged to catch up. "This better not be some elaborate trick to get me to a hot dog stand." The dog, Shadow, didn't acknowledge her joke. He simply picked up the pace. They had left the busier part of town now, entering a neighborhood Ellie recognized from old case files. A place filled with abandoned buildings, broken windows, and crime scenes she wished she could forget. A chill crept up her spine. Shadow suddenly stopped in front of an old, decrepit house with boarded-up windows. Its once white paint was now cracked and peeling, the front yard overtaken by weeds. The house looked utterly unremarkable, one of many forgotten structures scattered throughout the district. But Shadow was fixated. Ellie studied the house, her fingers itching toward the gun holstered at her hip. Then she saw it. The front door wasn't locked. It was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness visible through the gap. Shadow let out a low, guttural growl. Ellie's pulse spiked. This wasn't random. Something or someone was inside. Her training kicked in. She pressed herself against the outer wall, her breath slowing, her senses sharpening. Her heart pounded, adrenaline buzzing in her veins. She peered through the window, but thick curtains blocked the view. Shadow paced beside her, his ears twitching, his muscles taut. Ellie inhaled sharply. A choice loomed before her. She could turn back, call it in, wait for backup. Or she could trust the dog who had led her here with unwavering certainty. Her fingers curled around her radio. "Dispatch," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is Detective Carter. I need a unit at 1919 Maplewood. Possible break-in." She didn't wait for confirmation. Hand hovering over her gun, Ellie pushed the door open and stepped inside. Shadow followed without hesitation. The air inside was thick, stale, and laced with something rotten. Dust motes swirled in the dim light, filtering through the cracks in the boarded windows. Ellie's every sense was on high alert. She listened, waited. Then, a sound. A soft creak from somewhere deeper in the house. Ellie's grip on her weapon tightened. Shadow let out a soft whimper and nudged her leg, urging her forward. Whatever had brought them here, they were about to find out.
Ellie's heartbeat was steady, controlled, but the unease creeping up her spine was harder to shake. She had walked into countless crime scenes before, but this one felt different. Too quiet, too expectant. Shadow stood beside her, ears perked, body tense, his deep brown eyes locked on the hallway ahead. A thick layer of dust coated the wooden floor, but footprints were visible, fresh, uneven, leading toward the back of the house. Someone had been here recently. Ellie adjusted her grip on her Glock and took a cautious step forward. The floor groaned beneath her weight. Creak! The sound echoed through the empty house, bouncing off peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceilings. Shadow growled low in his throat, his body rigid as he turned his head toward the hallway. Ellie whispered, "What do you hear, boy?" Shadow didn't move, but his muscles coiled like a spring. Something was back there. Ellie exhaled slowly, then reached for her radio. "Dispatch, Detective Carter here. I'm at 1919 Maplewood. House appears to be occupied. I need backup, silent approach." Static, then a crackling response. "Copy that, Carter. Nearest unit is 15 minutes out." Too long. She'd been in this situation before. 15 minutes could mean the difference between making an arrest or stumbling upon another dead body. Her gut told her she didn't have that kind of time. She had two choices: wait outside for backup or keep moving forward. Ellie glanced down at Shadow, his nose twitching, eyes locked on the darkness ahead. Her decision was made. She followed the footprints. The discovery. The hallway stretched before her, the walls closing in as the dim light from the boarded-up windows barely illuminated the path. Her breath was steady, controlled. Left foot, right foot. Shadow stayed close, his tail low, his focus razor-sharp. Then, a sound. Faint. A shuffle. Ellie froze. She strained her ears. There it was again. A muffled whimper. Small, human. Her grip on the gun tightened as she pressed her back against the wall and slowly peeked into the nearest doorway. An empty room. Dust-covered furniture. A broken ceiling fan hanging by a wire. Nothing. She moved to the next door, gripping the handle with her free hand. Shadow stood still beside her, his breathing slow, deliberate. With a silent count to 3, Ellie turned the knob and pushed the door open, and froze. The room was filled with computer monitors, their blue glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. Stacks of old papers, torn maps, and surveillance photos covered a large wooden desk. But that wasn't what made Ellie's stomach drop. In the corner, huddled on a thin mattress, was a girl, no older than 10. Her wide, terrified eyes locked onto Ellie's, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Ellie immediately lowered her gun, raising her free hand. "Hey there, sweetheart. It's okay. I'm here to help." The girl didn't speak. She hugged her knees tightly, her frame painfully thin, her clothes dirty and torn. Ellie scanned the room quickly. No immediate threats. Who had left her here, and why? Shadow took a cautious step toward the child, his ears softening, his tail wagging slightly. Ellie watched as the girl's eyes darted between her and Shadow. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the child reached out her hand. Shadow stepped closer and gently nudged her fingers with his nose. Ellie's throat tightened. That small gesture, that moment of trust, was everything. She turned back toward the desk, quickly scanning the contents. Papers, photographs, reports. Her breath hitched when she recognized one of the faces in the photos, missing person files. Dozens of them, all children. A lump formed in her throat. She picked up one of the documents, her eyes scanning the text. Name, Olivia Reese. Age, 10. Missing since April 17th. Last seen, Maplewood Elementary, 2 blocks from here. The realization hit her like a freight train. This wasn't just a random crime scene. This was a holding site, a trafficking hub, and they had just walked into it. A dangerous presence. Ellie's pulse pounded in her ears. If the child was still here, it meant the people responsible could be nearby. She turned back to Olivia, keeping her voice steady. "Sweetheart, are you alone?" The girl shook her head violently. Ellie's stomach twisted. Who else is here? Then footsteps. Heavy, coming from the back of the house. Whipped his head around, his body stiff, his ears flicking toward the sound. Ellie immediately pulled Olivia to her feet. "We need to go." The girl clung to her, her small fingers digging into Ellie's jacket as fear flickered across her face. Footsteps. Closer. Ellie pulled out her radio again. "Dispatch, I have a victim. I repeat, I have a child on site. Possible suspect still inside. I need immediate backup." A loud bang echoed through the house, a door slamming open. Ellie's instincts kicked into overdrive. She grabbed Olivia's hand and bolted for the hallway, Shadow staying close, his body tense like a coiled spring. Another footstep, then another. Ellie reached for her gun, twisting toward the sound. A shadowed figure stepped into view at the end of the hallway. Tall, broad-shouldered, face obscured by darkness. Ellie's stomach clenched. Whoever this was, they weren't running. They were waiting. "Police!" Ellie barked, raising her weapon. "Step into the light. Hands where I can see them." No response. Shadow snarled. Ellie's finger hovered over the trigger. "I won't ask again." Then the figure moved fast. A flicker of motion, a glint of something metallic, and before Ellie could react, Shadow lunged forward. A blur of black fur and a snarl of teeth as Shadow launched himself at the stranger. A sharp yelp of pain filled the air. The figure stumbled back, cursing as Shadow's jaws locked onto his arm. Ellie seized the opportunity. She grabbed Olivia and ran. Out of the hallway, through the front door, into the open air. The sound of approaching sirens filled the street as flashing blue and red lights illuminated the night. She turned back just in time to see Shadow darting out of the house, his coat gleaming in the flashing lights. The figure inside? Gone. But the evidence inside? That would change everything. The flashing red and blue lights bathed the entire street in a surreal glow as the abandoned house became the center of a full-scale police operation. Officers moved in swift, calculated movements, securing the scene, sweeping for suspects, and ensuring Olivia's safety. Ellie stood near one of the patrol cars, watching as paramedics wrapped a blanket around the little girl's thin shoulders. Olivia clutched it tightly, her wide eyes darting between the unfamiliar faces. Shadow sat beside her, his tail curled around his body, an immovable presence of comfort. Ellie crouched to meet Olivia's gaze. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." The girl hesitated before whispering, "Are you sure?" Ellie swallowed the lump in her throat. "Am I?" She wanted to promise her the world, but the truth was, the people responsible were still out there. She settled for a firm nod. "I promise." From the corner of her eye, Ellie saw Captain Myers approaching, his usual slow, deliberate pace now a brisk, irritated stride. His expression was unreadable, but Ellie had been in the force long enough to recognize that he wasn't pleased. "My office. Now," he said, barely glancing at her before walking past. Ellie let out a slow breath and scratched Shadow behind the ear. "You might have just saved that girl's life, buddy." Shadow wagged his tail once, but kept his eyes trained on the house, as if sensing the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Ellie had been in Captain Myers' office more times than she cared to count, but tonight, as she sat in the worn leather chair across from his desk, the air felt heavier than usual. Myers leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Tell me exactly what the hell you were thinking." Ellie met his gaze evenly. "I was following a lead." "Dog?" His voice was flat, almost incredulous. "You left the station, ignored protocol, entered a dangerous location alone, all because a stray dog led you there." Ellie clenched her jaw. "I wasn't alone. I had backup on the way." Myers scoffed. "You went in blind. That's reckless." Ellie sat up straighter. "That reckless decision just saved a child from a trafficking ring. And if I hadn't followed that dog, Olivia Reese might not have lived to see another day." Silence hung between them like a thick fog. Finally, Myers exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Carter, do you have any idea what kind of storm you just kicked up?" Ellie frowned. "What do you mean?" He opened a folder on his desk and slid it toward her. Inside were surveillance photos, reports, documents linking this house to a much larger criminal network. Ellie skimmed the pages, her gut twisting. "This wasn't just some random hideout," Myers continued. "We've been trying to track this operation for over a year. We suspected something big, but nothing ever stuck. And now, thanks to you," he gestured toward the folder, "we might finally have enough to bring them down." Ellie looked back down at the reports. The pieces were coming together. The missing children, the underground network, the people moving in the shadows. And somehow, Shadow had led her right into the heart of it. A knock at the door interrupted them. Detective Nate Foster, Ellie's longtime friend and tech expert, stepped inside, holding a thick file. "We ran some tests," he said, tossing the folder onto Myers' desk. Ellie flipped it open and felt her breath catch. Inside was a photo of Shadow, but it wasn't a random street shot. It was a missing poster. Ellie blinked. "What the hell is this?" Nate sighed. "Turns out our stray isn't so stray. His real name is Max. He belonged to a family that was murdered in their home 6 months ago." Ellie's blood ran cold. 6 months ago? "The same time this trafficking ring started expanding," Myers added grimly. Ellie stared at Shadow's picture, then at the dog himself, now curled up outside the office door. "You're telling me he escaped?" Nate nodded. "Not just escaped, survived. And somehow he found his way back into this mess." A sick realization settled in Ellie's stomach. What if he wasn't just wandering? She looked up. What if he's been trying to lead someone to the people responsible this whole time? Ellie barely slept that night. The weight of everything, the girl, the trafficking ring, Shadow's past, pressed down on her like an iron cage. She sat at her desk, flipping through case files, photos, reports. There had to be more. Shadow rested at her feet, his eyes barely open but still watching her, as if he too was waiting for something to click. And then, it did. Ellie shot up in her chair, the surveillance footage. She quickly pulled up the files the forensic team had recovered from the abandoned house's computers. Most were scrambled, corrupted, but one was intact. A grainy video flickered onto the screen. A warehouse, a dark figure standing near a row of cages. Ellie's stomach turned. What the hell were they doing? Shadow's ears perked. He stood, moving closer to the screen as if he recognized something. Ellie paused the video. The image sharpened just enough to show the face of a man. Ellie's breath caught. It was someone she knew. Someone from inside the force. Ellie's heart pounded. She grabbed the photo and rushed down the hallway, bursting into Myers' office. "I need you to look at this," she said, slamming the printout onto his desk. Myers frowned, then his face darkened as he studied the image. It was Lieutenant David Shaw, a senior officer known for his long tenure in law enforcement. Ellie's voice was hard. "Tell me why the hell one of our own is on a surveillance tape inside a known trafficking site." Myers didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back, his fingers tapping against his desk. "If Shaw is involved, this goes higher than we thought." Ellie crossed her arms. "We can't trust anyone until we know who else is in on it." Myers nodded, his expression unreadable. "You're right." He stood, his decision made. "Get ready. We're taking this down." Ellie felt a surge of adrenaline. The chase wasn't over. It was just beginning. She glanced down at Shadow, his golden brown eyes locked onto hers, filled with something unshakable. Determination. And for the first time in months, Ellie felt it too. The precinct was eerily silent as Ellie and Captain Myers went over the details of the operation that would change everything. The evidence against Lieutenant David Shaw, a high-ranking officer secretly working with a child trafficking ring, was damning. But there was a problem. "We can't just bring him in," Myers muttered, pacing. "If Shaw's dirty, others might be too. If he gets tipped off, we'll lose our one chance to take this whole operation down." Ellie nodded, her fingers tapping against her knee. She could feel Shadow beside her, his body tense. He had guided her this far, but she knew the real danger was still ahead. "We have to make Shaw think we're not onto him," Ellie said, her mind racing. "If we move too soon, he'll disappear." Myers exhaled through his nose, rubbing his jaw. "What's your play?" Ellie leaned forward. "We bait him. We let it slip that Olivia, the girl we rescued, is ready to talk." Nate, the team's tech expert, frowned. "That's risky if they think she's a threat." Ellie's jaw clenched. "Then they'll come for her." Silence. Then Myers nodded. "Let's set the trap." The warehouse. The plan was simple. Make Shaw believe Olivia was at a secure FBI facility, ready to give a statement. In reality, Ellie and her team would be waiting at a secluded warehouse, a location similar to the ones used by the traffickers. A place where Shaw would feel comfortable enough to let his guard down. Ellie checked her weapon as the team took positions. They had eyes on Shaw, tracking his movements. If everything went according to plan, he would arrive soon. Shadow stood by Ellie's side, his body rigid, his ears perked. He knew something was coming. Then, over the radio, "We've got movement." Ellie's pulse kicked up. She peered through the slats in the warehouse wall. 2 black SUVs pulled up outside. Shaw stepped out first, dressed in civilian clothes, but the way he carried himself screamed law enforcement. His expression was calm, unreadable. Then Ellie saw them, 2 armed men stepping out behind him. A chill ran down her spine. Shaw wasn't coming to negotiate. He was coming to eliminate a witness. Ellie tapped her radio twice, the signal for her team to hold. They needed Shaw inside before making their move. Shadow let out a low growl, his eyes locked on the approaching men. Ellie placed a hand on his back, feeling the tension in his muscles. Shaw stepped into the warehouse first, his cold gaze sweeping the empty space. "No agents," he mused. "Didn't expect Carter to be so sloppy." Ellie stepped into view, keeping her stance casual, like she didn't know the truth. "Figured we'd keep this meeting quiet," Shaw smirked. "And the girl?" Ellie gave him nothing. "She's safe." Shaw clicked his tongue. "See, that's a problem. We were hoping this situation could be handled quietly." Behind him, the 2 men spread out, their hands drifting toward their weapons. Ellie's heartbeat slowed. She wasn't just looking at Shaw now, she was watching for their first move. Then Shaw tilted his head, and all hell broke loose. The fight. It happened fast. Too fast. Shaw reached for his gun. Ellie dove behind a crate just as the first shot rang out. Shadow lunged, teeth bared, tackling one of the men before he could raise his weapon. The man screamed as Shadow's jaws clamped down on his arm. Ellie rolled to the side, taking cover behind a stack of rusted barrels. She fired twice, one bullet grazing the second man's shoulder before he ducked behind cover. More shots rang out. Then, silence. Ellie's breathing was sharp, controlled. Her mind raced. Where was Shaw? She peeked around the crate. Gone. She swore under her breath. Shaw had disappeared into the warehouse shadows. She turned to Shadow, who had pinned the injured man to the ground. Find him. Shadow snapped his head up, sniffed the air and bolted. Ellie followed. Shaw was running, but not toward the SUVs. He had another way out. Ellie sprinted after him, her boots slamming against the warehouse floor. "Shaw, stop!" He didn't. Shadow closed the distance first, cutting across the crates like a shadow in the dark. Then, a flash of silver. Shaw had a knife. Ellie's heart stopped as he swung toward Shadow, but Shadow was faster. He ducked beneath the blade and latched onto Shaw's leg, sending the corrupt officer crashing to the ground with a grunt. Ellie was on him in seconds, her knee pressing against his back, gun aimed at his head. "Move, and I swear to God I will put you down." Shaw laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "You really think this stops anything?" he hissed. You don't know how deep this goes." Ellie's grip tightened. "I know enough." The sound of sirens filled the air as backup finally arrived. And for the first time in months, Ellie felt something close to victory. Shaw was taken into custody. The operation wasn't just a success, it was a reckoning. His arrest led to a series of takedowns, unraveling a massive trafficking network spanning multiple states. Ellie stood outside the warehouse, exhaustion settling into her bones as she watched officers secure the scene. Then, a warm nudge against her hand. She looked down at Shadow. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was a partner, a survivor, a hero. Ellie knelt beside him, running a hand through his thick fur. "You did good, Shadow." He wagged his tail, pressing his head against her shoulder. For the first time in a long time, Ellie felt at peace. The precinct was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that followed a storm, when the damage was assessed, the wounds stitched, and life moved forward. Changed, but not broken. Ellie Carter stood in front of her desk, staring at the pile of reports, statements, and arrest records stacked neatly in front of her. The case was officially closed. Lieutenant David Shaw was behind bars awaiting trial, and the trafficking ring he had protected for years was dismantled. A chain reaction set off by a single dog. Ellie looked down at the real hero of this case. Shadow lay curled up at her feet, his sleek black fur clean now, his ribs no longer showing through. He looked healthier, stronger, but the same keen intelligence burned in his golden brown eyes. He had never been just a stray. He was a survivor, a guide, and in more ways than one, he had saved her. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. Detective Nate Foster stepped into her office, a smirk playing on his lips. "Captain Myers wants you in the briefing room." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "What for?" Nate shrugged. "Guess you'll have to find out." Ellie gave Shadow a quick pat. "Come on, partner, let's see what this is about." The briefing room was packed. Officers, detectives, and even federal agents from the task force filled the space. At the front of the room, Captain Myers stood behind the podium, his usual gruff expression slightly softer than usual. "Detective Carter," he called out. Ellie frowned, stepping forward. Shadow padded beside her, his tail swaying in curiosity. Myers took a deep breath before addressing the room. "We deal with a lot in this job. Cases that shake us, that make us question why we do this in the first place. But sometimes," he glanced down at Shadow before continuing, "we get reminded of the good, of the reason we fight so damn hard." Ellie felt her throat tighten. "This department has a tradition of recognizing outstanding service," Myers continued. "But sometimes exceptional bravery doesn't come from a badge. It comes from instinct, from heart, and from those who refuse to give up." He turned to an officer standing beside him who held a small black box. Inside, resting on a velvet cushion, was a golden medal engraved with the words, "For bravery and service." Ellie's breath hitched. Captain Myers stepped forward and knelt, placing the medal around Shadow's neck. The room erupted in applause. Shadow blinked, his tail wagging hesitantly before picking up speed. He turned to Ellie, as if asking what just happened. Ellie knelt beside him, running her fingers gently through his fur. "You earned this, boy." Shadow huffed, licking her cheek, sending ripples of laughter through the room. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ellie allowed herself to smile. Later that night, Ellie and Shadow walked through the park. The air was crisp, the city alive with the sounds of distant traffic and laughter. Shadow trotted beside her, his posture relaxed, as if he finally understood. He was safe now. Ellie exhaled, watching as he sniffed at a nearby bench before hopping up onto it, stretching out lazily. For so long she had carried the weight of failure, the guilt of losing Jack, the doubt in her abilities. But now, for the first time, she felt something lift. She wasn't alone anymore. Shadow had walked into her life like a ghost from his own tragic past, but together they had found a way forward. Ellie sat beside him, scratching behind his ears. "You know, buddy," she murmured, "you saved me just as much as I saved you." Shadow let out a soft sigh, resting his head on her lap, and for the first time in a long time, Ellie felt whole. News of the trafficking ring takedown spread fast. The FBI, local law enforcement, and child welfare organizations used the case as a blueprint to prevent future crimes. More than that, Shadow's story became a symbol. He wasn't just a stray dog. He was the one who refused to stop searching for justice. Months later, when Ellie finally signed the adoption papers, making it official, she realized something. Some cases haunt you, some leave scars, but some, just a few, give you something back, a reason to keep going, a partner for life. As she glanced at Shadow lying peacefully by the fireplace in her apartment, she smiled. They had both found what they were looking for, not just justice, a home.